I'm very happy that I've been working on this for several months now, so I'm very happy that it worked out for Gregory to come and speak to you today here as part of our Mindfulness Week. He has a book, but the same name as his talk, Insight Dialogue, The Interpersonal Path to Freedom. I guess the last thing I would just say is, it's great to have a personal mindfulness practice, but I think it's important what impact it has on your life and what can have more impact on your life than your relationships. That's why I think it's so important to this work that Gregory is doing with interpersonal practice of mindfulness. So I'm very excited to hear what he has to say, and with that, I'll turn it over to Gregory.
So thanks for coming. Thanks for all the work to work this out, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff. So there's a lot of talk about mindfulness and all kinds of practices, a lot of exploration of how to do it. Actually, I will be speaking about practicing mindfulness and other qualities interpersonally and what the values are of that, how you do it, that kind of thing. But the place that I want to start is more fundamental. It's why we practice mindfulness. And then specifically why interpersonal mindfulness begins to fall out of that. And then we can look at the practice, because now we have a sense of why are we doing it, right? So we're oriented. And the story begins actually in this, what you might call the human gift or the human dilemma, which is this incredible sensitivity of the organism. Just pure, straight-out sensitivity. So I'm talking about the eyes and the light touching the eyes. If you're in a dark room and there's just one photon, it can be detected. That's incredible, right? And then in addition to that, of course, all the specifics of color and shade, the subtlety of a visual capacity is astonishing. Likewise with sound. If you go into an anechoic chamber, you'll still hear lots of stuff because you'll be hearing your own bloodstream, your own heart. You'll actually hear the blood moving through the body. And very slight changes, even in the phase of a sound, an acoustic signal. And you'll hear differences there. Millisecond changes, and you'll hear rhythmic differences. Spectral changes, and very slight changes in loudness. The astonishing sensitivity of the ear is, we just sit around hearing. I mean, right now you're hearing me. And as you're hearing me, you're hearing the output of this body, right? And all of the muscle changes, all of the movement of the air is wiggling your eardrum. So as I'm speaking, I'm wiggling your head, right? You know what I'm saying? It's very intimate, but until you understand the sensitivity of this thing, this body thing, you can't understand the complexity of being human. And then mindfulness, it's like, doesn't have its real purpose. We don't understand the purpose. Likewise, the skin, just the touch, the temperature. I was once in, the Invisible Man exhibit where various plastics were injected into cadavers to reveal different organ systems, circulatory systems, nervous systems, and so on, and get rid of everything else so you can just see that. You look at just the nervous system, just the nerve endings through the body, and it's a cloud. There's nerves that go to every part of the body, and they branch and they collect finally up the spinal cord to the brain and so on. The data gathering that this body is doing from the outside and from the inside, gut feeling, right, is incredible. And molecules touch the nose, touch the tongue. So all these different ways of being in contact with the world. And this is exactly the basis of how we experience this life, right? So this sensitivity is an essential starting point. Would that it were that simple, but it's not, because all of this data gathering, all of these astonishing sensors that materials scientists could only dream of, duplicating that kind of sensitivity, all goes into, of course, the not just the neural system, not just the brain, but the whole hormonal system, all the cells, the whole body is processing this stuff. So what we call perception, sensation and perception, object formation, is equally nuanced. And from the time that we're born, and we're constantly developing, what is this world? What is this world? Where am I? And it's remarkable that we're able to decode somehow this flood of information coming in. The sensory information, it's not just signals, it's the processing of those signals to say, oh, there's a desk, there's a person, there's a tree, and so on. And would that it were even just that simple, right? It goes on from there. But look at what happens with just, let's just take something like body contact, right? So it's built in as a biochemical fact, a biological fact, that certain things are experienced as pleasant and certain as unpleasant because of it's how we're conditioned for survival, right? We need food, we need oxygen. Absence of oxygen, unpleasant, seriously unpleasant, right? But so, what about the presence of sugar? The presence of sufficient warmth on a cold day or sufficient coolness on a hot day, right? So there's if you take that to the extreme, of course, one would die of the heat or die of the cold and so on. So, but even just the moment-by-moment contact, there's this pleasant, unpleasant going on with these incredible sensitive systems. Now, that's what's driving the system, right? That's like where this, if you just picture us as sort of like some kind of kelp, waving in the sea, where's the nutrients that we want? And of course, we're always going for the sugar, we're going for the warmth, we're going for the softness, we're going for the food, and so on. We're going for the sex later, but I'll get to that later. So this coupling, this intimate coupling with our environment is a basic fact, right? Now, the yeast, for example, is also coupled with its environment, and where there's sugar, it somehow gets itself towards the sugar to be able to survive. Sugar, nothing. Sugar, nothing. Sugar, nothing. And then it dies. And that's life. That's life as a yeast. Sugar, nothing, sugar, nothing, sugar, nothing, death. So, okay, very well and good. But now you get more complex systems. You build up from the yeast to multi-celled organisms. And there begin to be, this brain, which is really quite incredible. And so we have not just sugar, nothing, we have, I prefer this or this. I'm going, the pleasures that I go for have a certain background, conditioning. And so I can actually not only sugar nothing, but it can be, I like a lot of sunshine, or I like the color blue, or whatever, and we go through life trying to get that. So this sensory urge is really pushing us. And, one of the unique things about humans is that this cortex is got thicker and thicker and convoluted, so more of it. And the neural networks interacting with the whole hormonal system created this organism for processing all this data. So now we also have mobility, so there's all the muscular stuff, so we can go towards the sugar and away from the loud noise or the dog poop or whatever it is. We have this, constant moving in the environment towards and away from pleasant and unpleasant. We're still intimately coupled. We're still, this sensor array and processing system, intimately coupled with the environment and moving away and towards all the things that we begin to prefer culturally, by how we were raised in our families and so on. So I want this kind of car, I want that kind of car, I want this kind of house, I want the safety, and so on. So not only is it sugar, or whatever it happens to be, you might like lemons, so we could say sour, but let's just say sugar to keep it consistent with the yeast. Sugar, nothing? But is it really nothing? It's a yearning now. When do I get the next sugar? Because now there's memory, right? And now there's thought. And now there's all kinds of baggage around what we get and what we don't get. So sugar, will I ever get any more sugar? Sugar, kind of stress. Sugar, stress. Sugar, stress. Then you die. Right? So it's a fact. I mean, that's kind of how we go through life. And some of us have, caviar suffering, Maserati suffering, death. And some of us have, pineapple suffering, banana suffering, death. But it's the same basic pattern. And the organism is dedicated to what it can get and moved by these sensory urges for pleasure. It's also not that simple, because it's perhaps one of the salient features, some would argue the unique feature of human beings, that there is this developed sense of who I am, a sense of self, right? So what's happening is all of those perceptions of objects of what is seen, all of those preferences, and in fact, living in the miasma of the tension that's formed with all this sugar suffering, all that stress, all that wanting, all that fear, keeps the whole nervous system and hormonal system in a very high state of alert. That's, and then we sleep enough, barely, and then we're back in this high state of alert. And all of that stress and all of that memory and all of those particular perceptions and preferences, actually the consistency of that, the steady pressure of that, begins to be identified as me. I am this person, I am this entity, I sense me moving through the world. And as I move through the world, the way I know I'm here is from these, these body tensions mostly and then the pleasures that stimulate me. So it might be a pleasant kind of tension, or it might be an unpleasant tension. Someone yells at me, or I hurt myself, or I have some fear because there's an animal coming at me. But it feels like me running away from that animal. It feels like me eating the pineapple. And so the me at the center now has this whole strategy that it makes up to get the pleasures, to think about the next pleasures, because we have this powerful mental capacity where we can project forward, right? And that's me projecting forward. So I'm going to get this. I'm going to live this way. I'm going to get a house. I'm going to get a nice sofa for my house. I'm going to get a TV this big. I'm going to get this kind of car, and that's all me. It could be the yeast and the sugar, but it couldn't be, because you don't have that constructing capacity. The yeast doesn't. We do. So we're constructing, and we're constructing a self, we're constructing a life. And the life is this being this sensitive organism, getting and avoiding and using our mobility, using this high intelligence to move about, guided by this sensitivity. And there you have it. So this self now, this me that wants to get and keep away, also has to survive. It's a big deal to stay alive. And there's all kinds of ways that this body-mind is configured to try to stay alive. And it's a huge effort. It's the effort of food, but it's also the effort of the mind. Keeping busy, having a sense of meaning, all the things that we do to orient that when we lose them, there's actually, depression, insanity, and so on that comes about when there's no sense of orienting framework, no direction. So this is really life and death, but we don't necessarily distinguish whether it's the death of the body or the death of the psychological self at the deepest level, at this level of where the whole body feels it, the whole body feels that sadness and fear. That's also facing death. And it gets even more complex. In fact, this is perhaps one of the biggest multipliers of the whole formula that I've just put out there. As humans evolved, as a species, a key point that differentiated and enabled their survival was what's called Eusociality, the development of the intrinsic relationality that has us cooperating together to survive in a world where many of the other large creatures are faster, stronger, and where the environment itself is changing and very difficult to live in. And by cooperation, we could survive. In fact, by cooperation, humans became the dominant species on the planet. We are the top of the food chain in this ecosystem. How did that happen? It didn't happen by hundreds of thousands or even billions of individuals being really capable and really smart. It came because we could work together. A corporation is people working together. Farmers is people working together. Any specialization at all is people working together. Money is people working together. The legal system, all culture, all people working together. Intellectual knowledge, language, everything. Everything that we identify as the stuff of my life. I mean, look around. We wouldn't have these desks if they hadn't been made at a manufacturer where human beings were working because we don't have time to make desks. We're busy making whatever, search engines or anything else. But not only that, the materials used in this, the plastics, and the history, the intellectual history, the scientific history behind developing plastics, and where they get the resins to make these plastics, all of it is people cooperating to make formica or something, let alone, if you're wearing gold mining, you're not mining the gold. If you're eating a banana, you're not growing the bananas. If you're using, some app, maybe you made the app, maybe you didn't, but the whole culture is made possible by this cooperation, but at a much more fundamental level, getting back down to this environmental kind of the intimacy with experience. Families. You wouldn't survive if you weren't cared for by your mother and probably your father. And the development of families and groups of families around a campfire, and families or people working together, small warrior bands could always defeat the individual fighter. So if you have a culture, a society of people who can work together to fight together, then that genetic material is going to pass along. But in order to fight together, you have to communicate well. You have to say, okay, you go over here, I'll go over here, and stuff like that. But you also have to be able to read their minds, their faces. What is safe? Just with your mother and with your father. When am I okay? When am I not okay? So built in to this social edifice, this cultural edifice that I was just talking about, all the way at the bottom is this intimate reading of other people, right? Where you look in the eyes and you know something, you touch something. You're doing that right now with me. You're reading me. And you're reading me with all the sensitivity that you grew up with, built on the sensitivity of those eyes, right? And this mind, your mind, saying, who is this guy, right? You can sense it, you can see, do I trust this? Do I trust this person? Is what's being said reasonable with the intellect? But everything I'm saying is also through reading my face and hearing my voice. Because this is what these sensory systems were bred to do. It's in your genetics to be able to read, am I safe? Right? That incredible sensitivity now, combined with all the other sensitivities we were talking about, also creates a field for desire and fear, right? So now the pleasures, it's not just sugar suffering, or cappuccino suffering, right? It's also seeing the other person, receiving and being seen by the other person, or not, right? So that's something like loneliness. Loneliness is adaptive. From the standpoint of the survival of the species, loneliness, the pain of loneliness is adaptive. Because if you leave the tribe, you're off on your own, the tribe gets weaker, and you probably won't survive. So that sense of being separate and outside, actually there's sensitive systems through the eye and the ear and the body that say, oh, wow, something's wrong here. This hurts. It's unpleasant. So there you are. Now let's go back to the yeast. Unpleasant, needs sugar, only the sugar is the tribe. The sugar is my mother. The sugar is my friends. The sugar is my partner. So we're seeking that contact. And so now we have not only a craving for what is sweet or warm or something, we have a craving for the other person. And the urges in our lives drive us towards that nourishment and away from where it's scary, right? Which is also adaptive, right? Because maybe it was unsafe. But even where it's not necessarily threatening to the physical body, but to the emotional body, I'll just remind you that at the level of the organism, it's about survival. It's, it's not as though when someone's really angry and aggressive that you think that they're actually going to murder you. But the urge to get away and the feeling of contraction and fear is happening, as far as this body-mind knows, at the level of survival. Right? There's a whole flush of the hormonal systems that say, get out. Get out is get out. Then it's a matter of degree. So the urging to, for example, exist and be seen by others is a hunger that, just like the urge to breathe and to eat, rests in this wish not only for pleasure, but for survival, for existence. Because when you see me, I am. Because this sense of me came up from the moment I was born. Let's say you're my mother. In that moment of contact with my mother, I begin to feel like me. And all my neural systems weave together. I get this sense of me. Safety. I can let go. And that's okay. So now let's look at this sensitive organism, and we can talk about mindfulness in a meaningful way. Right? So here we have this sensitivity to the physical environment, the touching of the eye, the touching of the ear, touching on the skin, and so on. And the touching now also of the mind, all the thoughts that come up. And when what is seen or heard is another human being, then there's actually the recruitment of neural systems that have evolved to be sensitive to other human beings. And they too are feeding into this whole assessment of how I am in the world, and my getting what I want and staying away from what I don't want. And I'm driven by that. And the kind of sugar suffering pattern, at all of its levels, the level not just of sensual pleasure, but of survival and of safety, has worked together with this astonishing intellect and these incredibly complex social systems that we have built together, patterns and layers on top of layers on top of layers, where multiples of us are creating social systems with all these aspects of pleasure and safety and so on. And so it's sugar, suffering, and now the suffering is this urging, right? This urging for these pleasures, urging for survival, and just urging to get out because it's too much. It's just too much. Because of the sensitivity we've described is like, how do you turn that off, right? So we find ways to get out, right? Whether it's alcohol and drugs or just losing ourselves in media, all kinds of ways of dulling the sensitivity, right? So we have all of this complexity. And that tension, that sense of me, and that teeming sense of what now, what now? That's the dilemma. And that's where mindfulness and other practices can make a difference. Because all of this is happening, all of this construction of the self, this reaction to sensory, reaction to interpersonal contacts and so on, is all happening moment by moment, and we're completely ignorant of it. And we're driven by these urges to get and to get away from and to, gain safety and so on. And we don't even know it. We're automatons in our own fabricated, sensory social miasma. We're just, wow. Right? That ignorance is what allows it to keep going. That's why there's so much stress. Because we don't see that there's so much stress. And the reason we don't see there's so much stress is because there's so much stress, right? We don't take the time to look. The surface of the surface of the sea is so turbulent we can't see underneath. So we stay in that kind of ignorance, and sugar, suffering, sugar, suffering, sugar, suffering, and then we die. But what if we could wake up in it? Does it have to be that way? Is that the only script that's possible? So at essence, mindfulness asks, what do I keep in mind? That's what mindful means, right? It's like remembering something, holding something in mind. What can I keep in mind that will help me wake up to how things actually are, not just my running around in the rat cage of my constructing process, worried about how to perform or how to get out or, the usual life, just life, right? Is he going to like me? Is she going to like me? Am I going to get a raise? Was my car going to work? Will I ever get that Maserati, and will I ever eat caviar all day? That's it. Can we do any better than that? So the power of mindfulness, of holding in mind something like, let's say this question, what's going on right now? Let's say that's what we're holding in mind. It's like a question. What is my experience now? You understand? So any time that I remember to ask that question, maybe I can begin to see a little bit, or remember to even look at this turbulent surface of moment-by-moment experience. Maybe it's still turbulent, but I begin to look. So the first affordance of mindfulness is going to be what? Knowing that there's turbulence. It's not going to be all sweet and light. You're going to see the mind as it actually is, not how you want it to be. So that can be pretty discouraging, right? I mean, wow. I think I'll go back to being deluded, ignorant, and and busy-minded. At least I didn't know that it was so bad. But there's a lot of problems with that, aside from the fact that sugar, suffering, then you die, and it's all kind of meaningless. But there's also a lot of self-obsession in our suffering and our self-involvement in our world. And yet there's these altruistic impulses that are built into the organism just as much as this selfish urge to survive and get pleasure. Because, like I said, by the social evolution of the human species was dependent upon the development of love and compassion. So that's also built in. So not only does mindfulness open up a look at what's going on, and you get to see oh my God, I'm always self-obsessed. When am I going to get this? Am I safe? All this kind of stuff. But you begin to say, oh, there's a friendliness, there's care. When I see you, I see your tenderness, and my heart vibrates. It does, and that's quite sweet. And that's part of the deal too. And so now we begin to open up to moment-by-moment experience. in a way that the road isn't just going to be set by habit. It's a major change. It's a big, big change. If there's already some kind of internal assurance that mindfulness is a useful thing, like you go to look at a video about mindfulness because you heard it's a good thing, or you come to this talk because you're already convinced that mindfulness is useful, then perhaps you have come to see that when you actually go to practice, that very often the mind wanders off. That's sort of built in to the experience of even a short session, literally even 1 minute, of mindfulness meditation, yeah? Just, okay, so we'll stop. You say, what's your mind doing right now? And you can feel the engine revving, right? It's just like all that, that Ferrari of an engine saying, give me something to do, please, Because that's it, right? We've got this power, this like convoluted cortical power built into this hormonal, like engine. Give me something to do. And that's what we're facing. So even a minute of consistent remembering to notice what is happening now is challenging, let alone getting still enough to see down into each moment of sensory contact, social contact, and so on. So it's difficult. So there's all kinds of practices, all kinds of tricks. Your 1 minute mindfulness, your 3 minute mindfulness, mindfulness at the desk, mindfulness while eating, mindful walking. There's all kinds of practices and all kinds of things you can try. I'm going to suggest, just very specifically and bluntly, that opening the practice of mindfulness beyond the isolated self-unit is an important and powerful thing to do. So that's what I'm going to talk about now. When we're practicing mindfulness alone, we have the great benefit of simplicity. For example, if your practice is one of closing the eyes and just meditating and watching the mind, watching the breath, it's simple and there's not so much sensory input. Maybe the mind can calm down, the body can calm down. And there's always this, problem that we just mentioned of all that horsepower of the body-mind system, not knowing how to calm down, but gradually this is entrained, we begin to settle. But even as that process gets stronger, as you're able to sit, let's say, longer, more calmly, that very simplicity is both the most profound gift of practice, because, enough of the world for now, right? Just let me rest. But at the same time, when the emergent stories of your mind come forward, you know how they hook you? Have you practiced enough watching your own mind to know how you get hooked by the next thought, the next image, right? Once you're hooked, how do you get unhooked? You're a self-contained system, right? There's nothing else theoretically coming in that's going to help you get unhooked. But now let's say I'm sitting with you and you with me, and we have this agreement. And this agreement is, let's practice mindfulness together. Let's enhance and develop the ability to remain in this present moment I'll remind you and you remind me. All right? So here we are, and we talk about something that has us looking at moment by moment experience, like let's say sensation or thoughts or something. It doesn't matter the practice right now. But the point is, because I'm in front of you, if I go off and start thinking about my next vacation, skiing or something like that, and you're sitting there talking to me, aside from being rude, isn't it obvious that I'm not present? Or if you're talking to me and you completely wander and go all over the place and you're not alert and present, I'm going to notice that you're not present. You're going to begin to notice you're not present. Just because I'm here, not because I've said anything or done anything to you, just the fact that there's someone outside this system that says, are you awake? But when you tap into, when practice gets more specific and stronger, because insight dialogue is actually quite a specific practice. When practice gets specific and stronger, then it's actually opening up the pause that in that moment, all of those sensitivities developed over millions of years, me to you and you to me, right? Now, those sensitivities are in play saying, am I aware right now? Are you aware right now, right? And so that's actually activated. So rather than being with you and that being a distraction, all of a sudden it is riveting. It's riveting to be in that vibrating moment where this sensitivity is not denied, it's not pushed away, it's not fearful, but it's also not grabbed at. It's like, I'm not being with you just to have, let's say, the pleasure of looking at someone lovely, or that because you're entertaining me or something like that. I'm with you in the bare fact of alertness, of sensitivity. And when my mind goes off of that, you notice it. If I start, you know what I mean? You get it. Oh, wow. There is this moment. We can locate this moment. We can touch this moment and remind each other with a refinement that's astonishing. So now we have this doorway into the practice of mindfulness that recruits this power rather than be thrown off by it. A big difference, because think about it, isn't social contact usually where your mindfulness is weakest? You can be totally great, chilling out on the cushion. You get up, you go into your meeting, or you go to your family or whatever, gone, right? Because it takes so much, such powerful cognitive resources to engage socially, and that you then become the me, the self, you inhabit that, and you're gone, basically. You're in the fabricating process of where's my pleasure, where's my safety, where's my stimulation, and there you go. Then you're just back in the game. But when there's an intentionality, as there is in insight dialogue, that says we are gathered specifically to cultivate mindfulness and calm, then you've set a very different frame, and you've recruited the same power that would draw you out to bring you into the moment with strength and endurance. So to foster that, there's specific meditation guidelines. Pause is one of them. Pause is the first one. It's about mindfulness, right? It's about interrupting the stream of a habit. Relax is receiving, accepting, allowing what's happening in the present moment. Then this guideline open is establishing the mindfulness both internally and externally on the other, and both. So you become aware relationally, right? It opens out from just this self unit. And then trust emergence is pointing us towards, in that moment where we're both established in awareness, there's this attuning to the impermanence, attuning to the flow, the flux of experience. And that's something one learns to do. One can cultivate that quality of adaptability. And then speaking and listening, speaking the truth, listening deeply, are actually developed over time as meditation practices, where there's not only the mindfulness of speech, but internal sensitivity to find out what is true that I would speak. It's quite a delicate, beautiful process. And listening deeply, again, yes, there's mindfulness as its basis for sure, but it also has a kind of a receptivity to experience to the other, and a recognition that you're listening musically, just as you're listening linguistically, and you're listening, just with your whole sense of being in that moment of relationship. And what I've been seeing, because I teach these retreats, I teach insight dialogue retreats all over the world. If you do this intensively, and you interleave this insight dialogue practice with silent meditation practice, the power of the stilling, calming quality and the refinement of individual meditation can help cut through this entanglement that we were talking about. And then you can move into the relational practice that in some ways accelerates those qualities of mindfulness, concentration, investigation, energy, to really penetrate what is this entanglement? Can I be free? Is any kind of freedom possible? Or is there only this conditioned sugar, suffering, death kind of cycle? And what I've seen with literally thousands of meditators is that the depth of insight possible is astonishing, really, to me anyway, very beautiful. And it's very much fitting with the maps of insight, the maps of human development that are understood and known over thousands of years in traditional contemplative systems. Because my background is as a Buddhist teacher. All my teachers were monks and nuns in the Buddhist tradition. And I have a lot of training and a lot of knowledge of in that tradition, and that's mostly where I teach. But it's understanding it as a deeply human practice built on this human entanglement and this possibility for freedom. If you aim in that way for either individual mindfulness practice or relational mindfulness practice, if you aim for the unentanglement, the disentanglement, all of the other benefits of mindfulness that are so desired, they come for free. Being more relaxed, being more creative in your work. With relational practice, especially being able to work well with others, being sensitive relationally, being skillful in your relationships, skillful in your speech. Those all come for free if you focus on the disentangling, because that's the bigger problem and that's the core problem. And as a result, kind of getting a sense of this deeper potential, both of, again, individual mindfulness practice or relational mindfulness practice, would be a really helpful thing, I think, for all of us who are involved in the mindfulness activities that are so much needed and growing in this world. So I'll leave you with that, and I guess just close by saying that the movement of the mind towards peacefulness, towards the kind of freedom, is ultimately not just a selfish endeavor. It really changes who we are with other people and how we act in the world. If we can invite that directly into our practice and realize that to practice mindfulness is to practice compassion, to be sensitive to others. It is to develop in our own body minds this capacity for loving kindness, for care. If we don't see that as separate, then we can see we can practice all the time. So thank you.
How do you stay mindfulness all the time? It's easy to get distracted, but I know that throughout practice still our mind just sometimes can't control, it's floating around.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, how's your day-to-day like to stay in mindfulness? And do you meditate in the morning to get better mindfulness?
Yeah. This is where I'm really glad I laid the groundwork. You have this question, how do you stay mindful all the time? Remember the whole first part of the talk, I was describing the tangle? So we have to realize that this human situation is complicated and that it's not easy. So you really want to come in with patience and compassion for yourself and diligence. Just steady, step by step, remembering. How do you remember? Well, you could put a band on your wrist like Van was suggesting at the beginning. And you can have all sorts of tricks, but you really need to shift the basic neural hormonal subsystems in a significant way. And for me, a nice, longer meditation time, especially in the morning, for example, really is important, because if you can just for a moment step out of the system of fabrication, then you remember, oh right, there is a difference, just that much. And then the rest of the day, you might be in it, but you know you're in it. That's a big difference. Then the heart begins to yearn to not be a slave of that system. And that yearning is your motivation. That kind of fire says, oh boy, I thought this was really okay, being totally tense and totally driven by hunger all the time. Was like, that was okay. Now I don't think it's okay. Something like that. And you begin to change, saying, I want to be awake. I really want to be awake, because it's less suffering. And lo and behold, I'm kinder, I'm smarter, a lot smarter, right? So you begin to, you have the carrot and the stick that's moving you forward. Also, if you can ever get off on a retreat, I know it's hard to do with a busy life, but if you can ever get away for a couple of days or a week or something to go deep into practice, then you touch a quality of experience that is really different than the mundane, entangled way of being. It's really different, and you say, oh, that's what we're talking about. And then again, you get the inspiration, you have a sense of direction. The mind is intending in a certain direction. And then, practices, and who are your friends? Who are you hanging out with? You don't have to answer this, don't worry. You know what I mean? Who are you hanging out with? Are you hanging out with people who don't care about that, who are like always, let's say, getting either intoxicated or who feed on high-level distraction because that's feels like life? Well, then you're going to fall into that. So those kinds of social decisions make a big difference, actually. It's not a popular thing to say, but it's how I believe it to be true.
So just to prevent this from being misinterpreted, I'll mention this is coming from a partner dance background. I'm curious what place you see for physicality in kind of your system of developing active listening and awareness of other people.
So you're asking you have a particular interest from the partner dance, you said?
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No, that's good. I just want to name that because,
sure. Yeah.
Because there are so many skillful doorways into being more awake. My particular background has me inclining to these, meditative practices that are either in silent meditation, look very much like regular silent meditation, because it is, right? And in dialogic meditation, of course, if you're introducing speaking and listening, it's already, from a Buddhist standpoint, quite radical, right? But then what you talk about is the lived human experience according to a framework that says, look over here, tell me what you see, and let's talk about that, right? So it's guided, and that's skillful. You have all kinds of movement systems, from Qigong to yoga to dance, that engage the physical body in incredibly skillful ways that, in the case of partnered stuff, really create a communications channel. I would just turn it back, and then you could answer the question yourself. How is the development of mindfulness in those? So you get that there's an energy, you get that there's some sense of inquiry and maybe calming, tranquility, but is there also the what's going on right now question being asked? I'm not saying there is or isn't, but that's what I would ask. Yeah. But that's all I have to say. I mean, within Insight Dialogue retreats, there are various periods of movement and so on to bring the life to the body, to bring ease and comfort to the body and so on. But it's not as nuanced and skillful as a lot of other body-based practices.
I'm pretty new to studying and trying to practice mindfulness, and a question that keeps coming up for me is that I see and hear a lot of people talking about mindfulness in a way that's just very accepting of everything and everyone with this compassion, which is good, but how does mindfulness come into play when there is an actual danger, or you actually do need to get away from people or situations that are actually harmful?
Yeah.
Is that wrong to do that, or so I sort of some people have the sense like, no, nothing is good or bad, and everything is just this base level happy all the time, and I don't think that is truly what mindfulness is.
Yeah.
But I think that's where a lot of people want to take it.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It is just actually kind of staying away, but so boundaries are actually important in interpersonal relationships, and how does mindfulness play into that?
Yeah. I would put what you're asking in a context of ethics, right? So, am I causing harm? Are others causing harm to me? And so on. That's a starting point for saying, for example, there are boundaries. How are those established? How do we treat each other with care and respect? And if someone isn't treating us with care and respect, what are we supposed to do? Is just ignore that and, everything's groovy, no problem. Right? That's not very wise, because harm can be done in this world. That's not news. And harm can be anywhere from the obvious physical harm to emotional abuse and beyond. So, there's the standpoint of the practice, the subtlety of development of mindfulness and so on, that requires safety. And in the case of a group or a retreat or something, it's up to the person who's convened that or the entity that's convened that to really guard that safety. And as a teacher, I can tell you I take that as a very high priority, and I would imagine that any group you would do, for example, here, would be really cared for in that way and watched over. However, out in the world, where there's not necessarily a contract being held to for interpersonal safety and so on, I would not put that in the context of a formal practice of mindfulness. That's where your mindfulness is going to come to serve you, right? So, am I safe? And you know what's going on in the mind. You know what's going on in the body, and you can touch down into that sense of being ill at ease, of being violated or potentially violated in some way. And then you say, this isn't safe. You get up, you walk out. But all in all, the notion of, let's say, mindfulness practices or spiritual practices or what have you, as being like everything's groovy, is a gross distortion of what being awake really points to. Because being awake is being awake to actuality, and there is a tremendous amount of degraded, let's say, activity in this world. And even subtly, power differentials, racial discrimination, all kinds of things that make for a lack of safety. And certainly in interpersonal practices, you also have all the potential sexual nuances if partners who might be attracted to each other, whether it's male-male, female-female, or male-female, however it goes, there's the potential for a kind of a unwise way of engagement, right? That's based on urges for pleasure and confusion and basically objectifying the other person. And then if that person happens to be you, it's absolutely not okay. And that's to be known, that's to be spoken. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but I hope it at least dispels any notion of the kind of practices I'm talking about as being everything's groovy all the time kind of attitude. Yeah.
Yeah, and just I guess other than just dispelling that notion, how does mindfulness help with, I guess, interpersonal conflict, where it's not just necessarily just needing to get away that something is actually unsafe, but in terms of just people who are not necessarily, part of your retreat or something like that, you're dealing with the world.
Oh,
and,
of course.
You have conflict with people. How does mindfulness help with that? Or just one example. I'm sure there's many.
Well, okay. So when, Jesus said, wherever two or more are gathered, there am I among them. That's great. That's beautiful. I have a little twist on that. Wherever two or more are gathered, it gets complicated. Right? And that's just true. And if there's more, it gets more complicated. So if you just look at, I'll get to your question more exactly, but we have to, again, deal with the basics. You're taking the most complex thing in the known universe, which is the human body-mind, and you're putting two of them together. It's like, whoa. All these sensor arrays are going like crazy, and all the neural networks are like vibrating all internally within one system. It's like, who am I? Where am I? Am I safe? What's going on? I have to accomplish my stuff. You're in my way. Get out of my way. And then comes abuse back and forth, unkindness. Or maybe it's not even unkindness intended to be unkind. It's just like, I got a job to do. What's with you? You should have had that on my desk. Whatever, right? But what it is it's just this system internally incredibly agitated. This one maybe was less agitated, but now is getting really agitated as this one, right? So now you have these two incredible sensitive organisms interacting. So the first thing is to say, am I right and this guy wrong? Am I wrong, this guy right? Stuff like that, maybe, maybe not. What am I feeling? Am I safe? Am I not safe? What is he or she feeling? Is there pain? Is there aggression? What's going on? And so now the sensor arrays, all that data coming in, moving through not just perception, but all of our memories, all of our conditioning is what's acting. Are we reacting completely slavishly based on that conditioning? Or is there, in that moment, mindfulness of how I actually feel, what's actually happening, how this person might be, and so on? It's very difficult sometimes. Because when the emotional stuff comes in, it hijacks the attention. And we move into the internal loops of our concerns about safety or getting something done or getting out or whatever. So mindfulness opens up a choice at such a moment. Do I pause? Do I actually try to down-regulate and assess? And can I be open to this, not open like spill my guts, but can I be sensitive to how this person's doing? Do I fall into judgment? Do I fall into my rightness and my stance? Because who knows, you may have some baggage too, And a level of skill that comes out of that kind of activity, rather than whatever you're conditioned to just shoot out at that moment, and then the system resonates as you go back and forth with this other person towards anger, delusion, and so on. So it's possible to cut that feedback system, and that's a big step forward. If you're asking me how, then that is a significant matter of practice and developing the ability to not be carried away, to pause, and to skillfully observe the body-mind. And have the intentions for tolerance also. You know how much you're suffering, right? How much are they suffering? Life is hard for everyone. That's hard to remember when it's hard for you. But maybe that's the better time to actually remember also. Yeah, thanks. Good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gregory.
Thank you, Van. Thank you, everybody, for listening. It was nice to be with you. So if you want to find out more about this practice, about the retreats, about online practices, you can go to metta.org, metta.org, and there's lots of information there.